So I've wanted to talk a bit about how well TBC Anniversary has done for Blizzard for some time now, because the numbers coming out of Ironforge.pro have been remarkable. But there are also a few different angles here worth discussing which aren't necessarily so obvious at first glance. And honestly, in some ways Anniversary has done so well that it's kind of made the situation possibly more awkward for Blizzard. So let's talk about it. To understand just how big TBC Anniversary has been, it's worth looking at how Vanilla Anniversary did first and what that says about the state of the game. Vanilla, as predicted, did fine. I mean, it typically always does on a fresh release. You can't go wrong with fresh, can you? The Anniversary raiding population peaked just above 100,000 characters according to Ironforge.pro, and that was around the Blackwing lure time, which is very standard for Vanilla. And then the numbers held up reasonably well across the whole run from Molten Core through to Naxxramas. Taken in isolation, it was a healthy active group of servers, and Vanilla will always have that flaw. There will always be people who want to go back to that original and unchanged version of the game. But the player ceiling in terms of how high it can go has only been shrinking over time, and that's just an observation of where we are at the moment. Since the original 2019 Classic launch, we've had Classic Era, which is still ongoing, we've had Season of Mastery, which closed, we had Official Hardcore Realms, which are still running, we've had Season of Discovery more recently, which is also still continuing with a bit of a mysterious future, and of course the last installment for Vanilla has been the Anniversary Realms themselves. That is a lot of different versions of the same content, and every one of them has been drawing from the same pool of people who want that original game experience, or at least the original game experience to some extent. What I mean is you're still playing within the same world, with usually the same class balance and the same content as you level and towards endgame. I suppose Season of Discovery is the big odd one out here, but apart from that, things have been pretty consistent and largely to that no changes crowd. Though for me personally, and judging by there being a reduction in players, I think we can say that after some time, fresh begins to get a little bit stale, especially when we're just reliving the same content again and again. People have had a ton of choice for playing Vanilla from Blizzard. The point is that so many different versions have been available that another re-release was just never going to do anywhere near as well as the original one in 2019. But then, at least for Anniversary, the Dark Portal opened, and this changed everything. TBC Anniversary has been the first chance anyone has had to go back to playing TBC since Blizzard released it in 2021. TBC never had an Era Realm, it didn't have seasonal servers, no remix, no alternative, just the 2021 release, and then absolutely nothing for close to 5 years. And somewhere in the middle of that 5 years, it turns out that a lot of people really started to miss Outland. When Tier 4 raids opened in late February this year, Ironforge.pro showed a population of around 240,000 characters, more than double the peak of what Vanilla Anniversary hit, and it's seen an all-time high towards the start of Phase 2, with about 330,000 people logging on to play TBC. And I think this will be the ultimate peak. I doubt it will go much higher than this. All the same though, these player numbers are huge. Just to put it in context, TBC Anniversary is just a little bit behind the amount of players that it had in 2021, and that release had an enormous tailwind behind it. The 2021 version launched directly off the back of 2019 WoW Classic, which had been probably the biggest event Blizzard had seen in years for World of Warcraft, and then the audience was at its absolute peak with wanting to relive these different versions of WoW. And here we are now with Blizzard having done nothing with TBC for 5 years and then re-releasing it, and well, suddenly people are coming back in droves. And it is worth noting too that Blizzard did sell character boosts for both versions of TBC, though the big difference with Anniversary is that it is considerably more alt-friendly than 2021 was, because of account-wide attunements, heroic dungeon keys, and so on. That is the most significant difference, which could be skewing the population in favour of Anniversary, but I think all things considered, these servers have just done really well for themselves. The waiting room for TBC was massive, and it was large precisely because Blizzard had offered no alternative. They offered no way to go back to Outland, no Era server to run your old characters on, or anything of the likes. And all that pent-up demand showed up in February when TBC re-released. Which leads me on to my next point. It's almost as though Era Realms, or all these different versions of Vanilla for example that have existed, have lowered the hype for the next release, because they have given players a way to permanently go back whenever they want. Vanilla has been playable continuously for nearly 7 years now, which is absolutely unbelievable. We don't have anything significant and new yet, but hey, I'm sure we will do soon, right? This meant that audience never had the desire to go back and relive the servers as they were because that service already existed to them. Imagine for a moment that a TBC Era Realm had launched when Warcraft Classic came out all those years ago. How many of the players who showed up in February for TBC Anniversary this year would have already been playing TBC on those servers, or perhaps as though they felt they got their fix from that and didn't want to go back again? There's a straightforward way of looking at this from Blizzard's perspective too. What do you think has made more money for Blizzard since 2021? The Classic Era servers, which initially launched with the character copies and subscription fees, or TBC Anniversary, which launched with character boosts and brought in numbers comparable to the very first re-release, on top of the subscription revenue? In fact, I remember a Blizzard dev tweeting out when TBC first happened, they were selling so many character boosts it actually broke the service for a while. So in light of that, I think TBC Anniversary will have made significantly more than any other Era Realm would have possibly done, and it won't be particularly close either, which then raises a rather unfortunate and interesting question about where TBC Era fits in all this, because Blizzard still have not announced anything on this, by the way. I don't think they'll do so till at least BlizzCon, if not sometime later when it makes more sense. But right now, from Blizzard's perspective, the best thing to do is to, well, just do nothing really. They just need to sit there and do nothing whilst the waiting room for the next big re-release grows and grows. And that waiting room will of course be for Wrath of the Lich King Anniversary. Again, it's not something that's been confirmed, but given how well TBC Anniversary has done, I can pretty much guarantee you that it's gonna happen. Wrath Classic first came out in 2022, and I'm just gonna say it did much better than TBC did. The hype around Northrend, Death Knights, Arthas and all that were on a completely different level. From my point of view as someone who's been making videos on this game since it came out, I can tell you the amount of interest for Wrath Classic was significantly higher than TBC. There were more people looking for videos, there were more comments on forums and various different online pages, and whatever you felt about Wrath Classic, whether it changed anything or it didn't, it seems as though on the story alone it's always going to have a really strong selling point. In fact, my most viewed video ever is my Wrath of the Lich King class series, which is about 1.6 million views now, which is pretty massive for my channel, and I can tell you that people are already looking forward to playing Wrath Anniversary again, because over the past month this has started to gain views again. So imagine TBC Anniversary launched 5 years after the last run with no alternatives to drain the demand in the meantime, and it's pulling in numbers comparable to 2021. Then Wrath Anniversary launching off the back of TBC has a compelling ceiling to aim for. And there's one more thing to make this even better for Blizzard, because they added in the WoW token midway through Wrath. This caused its whole own controversy at the time, but if Wrath Anniversary launches with the token built in from day one, on top of character boosts, on top of subscription, on top of the packs they sell, you're going to be looking at a huge month for Blizzard in terms of revenue. Whether it does as well long term over the course of the expansion, honestly, I don't really think it's that big of a deal for them. I mean, even with retail, they've switched to a much faster cadence for expansions, because it seems as though Blizzard are getting the bulk of their revenue on selling stuff when something is hype and it's new and it's fresh and it's just come out. And then the recurring subscriptions and in-game shop stuff for the remainder of the expansion is kind of a bonus. It's just that launch day or those few launch weeks or however long it may be that need to be absolutely massive for the game. But then of course, if we do end up going to Wrath and there are no Era Realms for TBC and potentially no Era Realms for Wrath, then what happens to those characters afterwards? Now that is a tricky question which really I don't even have a theory for. Maybe you just leave these servers in an error state for a few years and then you prestige all the characters. Who really knows what they can do here? The biggest thing on the horizon that really feeds into all this is what happens at BlizzCon this September, and presumably that Classic Plus gets announced there alongside these other areas of WoW being tied up somehow. I'm not going to go deep onto Classic Plus speculation now because I think there's more than enough content on that at the moment, but I think there's been enough signs pointing to an announcement this year and a release potentially late this year, but probably next year if I'm being honest. All the same, what Blizzard definitely is not going to do is walk away from the commercial opportunity that Wrath Anniversary represents, even if there's some potential overlap with Classic Plus development. And again, as mentioned, I think the big moment that really matters is the launch period for Wrath Classic. How many character boosts will they sell? How many pre-purchase packs will they sell, and so on? It could well be that Wrath Anniversary happens and then Classic Plus comes some 2 or 3 months later, once Blizzard have capitalized on that big release period. Because for the remainder of the expansion, things will only tend to trend downhill, especially if Blizzard doesn't announce what's happening next, which, if they don't have to, based on their history, they won't. Now, this isn't me saying I don't want to see our realms for vanilla, TBC and WRAF. I've been in favour of them on numerous occasions. But you do wonder with Blizzard now looking at TBC numbers whether they have some complicated feelings about the original decision to create Classic Era back in 2019. First of all, it locks them into a long-term commitment that they have to keep honouring, whether the commercial outcome justifies it or not. And it also seems as though the existence of those realms does detract in some ways from potential future releases. When people have that choice to go back, there's less hype for something new to come out in the future. Then again, Classic Era by itself has been huge for World of Warcraft as a whole. If we didn't have Classic Era realms, I guarantee you Hardcore would not have existed. By the time Hardcore started to get popular, we would have at least been playing on late TBC servers, if not WRAF ones, and it would have just been a completely different landscape. And I am happy that Blizzard have honoured their word to keep these servers around, and that thousands of people continue to enjoy them. Still, Anniversary for me always seemed like a bit of a stalling tactic from Blizzard, a bit of a real-life gold farm while they finish up Classic Plus. I mean, there's over 300,000 active people on TBC. I highly doubt Blizzard thought it would do this well. I certainly didn't think it would do this well. Maybe half of that if I'm being generous. It kind of reminds me of the Bethesda situation in Elder Scrolls 6. Why rush something when people keep buying Skyrim when they re-release it? Why rush Classic Plus when people keep playing Anniversary? I mean, if they're happy, who's to say they're wrong? Blizzard ain't gonna miss out on that WRAF Anniversary bag, I tell you what. Even with some Classic Plus potential overlap, the release of WRAF Anniversary will be huge, and then Blizzard will do the whole hands-off thing they've done with TBC because they're actually working on Classic Plus. At least that's my theory. You could argue that Blizzard created this situation for themselves, and it is a difficult one. You could also point out that a lot of people ask for it, and seeing the player numbers in-game, a lot of people indeed do want it. Still, for now, Phase 2 of TBC is live. There's a substantial amount of TBC left to get through with Tier 6 and the Sunwell, and we're a little bit over 3 months until BlizzCon, and I'm very much counting down the days until I can see what happens next. I am still hopeful for our realms for different versions of the game, but given how well TBC Anniversary has done, it's in a strange way probably made things a little bit more complicated for Blizzard than they anticipated. Anyways, just a random topic that I wanted to make a video about today, so I'll leave you with that, and as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you on the next one very soon.